My name is Zoelle. I'll be our host for the webinar today. And in our webinar, we're going to be walking through the complete guide to your recovery process, the full overview for the LA fires in particular. Before we get fully into it, I just want to make sure everyone knows this webinar is not intended to offer legal advice. This is our best practices, things we've learned from working with clients specifically, but not official legal advice. So please don't take it as that. And I'd love to introduce our two experts for today. So, expert number one, Justin, spent more than 21 years in insurance and rebuilding everything from time as a public adjuster and a carrier adjuster to working directly on rebuilds as well. Worked with thousands of folks on the aftermath of disasters. And he'll be helping us speak to the insurance process and a lot of the rebuild component. Our other expert today is Heather, who has spent her entire career working with survivors, first as a victims advocate and then as a disaster recovery specialist and case manager. And she is a particular expert in nonprofit and government support programs. Again, has worked with thousands of folks, lots of great expertise to bring to the table. So thank you to both Justin and Heather. A few quick housekeeping notes before we go any further. We are recording this webinar and we will be sharing the recording. So no need to take too many notes. There is a Q&A feature where you can put in your questions and we will save some time at the end for questions. But I will keep an eye on the Q&A as it comes in. And if there's something that's especially relevant in context, I will make sure that we go ahead and cover it sooner than later so everyone remembers what we needed to know. For today's agenda, we'll start with first the immediate aftermath, what you should be prioritizing right now in these few weeks after the fires. And then we'll get into an overview of the entire recovery process. There's a lot out there today talking about specific pieces of the puzzle, but not so much sort of putting it together into a full roadmap for you. So we're going to walk you through in more detail on the most important pieces. We'll also briefly talk about some common pitfalls and scams. And of course, like I mentioned, we will be saving some time at the end for Q&A. So thanks everyone so much for joining us, and we'll go ahead and jump in. And remember, recovery is a marathon. It is not a sprint. There are some things it is useful to do right away, but you have time. And we're here to help try and set good expectations and make sure that you can make really well-informed decisions. Grateful that we have the opportunity to help you through this process. So let's start first by talking a little bit about the immediate aftermath and some do's and don'ts for the first few weeks. So our very first do is document everything. And Justin, I would love to have you speak to why this is so important. Can you tell us a little bit about the importance of documentation and how to go about it most effectively?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. Documenting is really critical when you deal with a complexity issue like what most of you are facing in terms of the amount of information you're going to be given, your recovery process in general, from insurance to working through FEMA to working through SBA. There's a lot of information out there. You may also be working with multiple adjusters or have adjusters reassigned in terms of your claim. It's always good to take very detailed notes. In our world, typically, if it wasn't written down, it didn't happen type of mentality. And so any type of good conversations or things that you want to note from, any type of action within the process itself, just document it. And there's always, especially after a phone call, if you feel like you have some information that you really want to make sure you understand or that you feel like is the next step or the next piece moving forward, obviously document everything typically with an email or some other way in order to potentially reference it down the road.
Absolutely. And we have a little template we can send out as an example of what a documentation log might look like. So we'll include that in our follow-up for you. It doesn't have to be complicated, but it's just useful to sort of see what some of the details might look like. All right, another really important do here is to start an insurance claim immediately, even if you haven't yet had a chance to visit your home or have seen the extent of the damage yet. So, Justin, why is this so important? Why should you do this right now? And are there any best practices people should keep in mind?
Yeah, the key here is to notify your carrier of a loss within a reasonable amount of time. they do want to know as soon as you know that you have damages. So it is important to notify them if you do feel like you have even the potential of a claim. Some people haven't gotten back to their homes yet. There may be some structures still standing. There may be some heavy smoke inside where it's always safe to at least report the potential of you having a situation come down in terms of value that you may have suffered in terms of loss of value. So first and foremost, you're notifying the carrier. You're also documenting things that you feel are important at that time. Your immediate needs are going to be temporary housing and maybe some emergency funding. It's important to start that process, get an adjuster assigned to you so that you can start having conversations on your unique situation and specifics and hopefully get some help and support.
Yeah, absolutely. And talk a little bit about some of the questions that you should ask on that call. Things like loss of use, maybe getting a copy of your policy. Walk us through that.
Yeah, absolutely. A good thing is to always ask for what's called a certified copy of your insurance policy from your carrier. And what that is basically a legal copy of your policy that goes over your coverage limits, the context of the policy, which is, several pages, 30, 40, 50, 60, even up to 100 plus pages. It's important for you to have that so that you can reference it at any point, especially when you're talking with your adjuster or you have questions or any type of confusion in terms of what you may be owed or what may be available to you. Requesting a certified copy is always important. And then really the next piece is typically, your temporary living situation. Where are you staying? Things of nature. Those would be the immediate conversations to have in order to at least get you stabilized with the type of situation that you're involved in.
And then for people who do have access to their homes, which I know a lot of folks don't right now, but for people who do, you've told me before that there's something that some insurance companies offer called preferred vendors who can help with immediate mitigation. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what those preferred vendors might be able to help with and why that's important right now?
Yeah, so the next step for people that actually have not suffered severe type of repairs is usually more of a mitigation type of scenario where smoke is usually in the property itself, on the walls, things of that nature that need to be abated. Most carriers will have their own network of vendors that could help out in at least trying to give an estimate or start understanding the scope of work that is needed in order for you to potentially move back into your property at some point. So it's not necessary that you have to use the preferred vendors that they typically work with. It is a good starting point, in my opinion, to always have an opinion on what they feel like the appropriate remediation process should be. But I always recommend to have your own as well. Have your own remediation contractor look at the potential situation and give their own opinion as well. Smoke damage in general is very subjective. And so this is just where having as many experts as possible trying to understand what really is needed in order to get you back to pre-loss condition.
Absolutely. And we'll talk more about mitigation later in the program. One other thing to call out here, just because there is forecasted to be some rain, those preferred vendors maybe, if you have access to your property, may be able to help you with things like tarping your roof. So we'll talk about why that matters later. But since we're talking about early in the week things to do, keep that in mind. They may be able to get someone to help you if you have access to your property. All right. So the next piece here is one program from FEMA, which is available immediately. Heather, can you walk us through serious needs assistance and for anyone who hasn't yet applied, what it is, if they should apply, what that looks like?
Sure, yeah. So the serious needs assistance is intended to be approved quickly. It is money right up front for your emergency needs. We're generally past the point of gas to evacuate, but if you're staying in a hotel, if you need to replace medications that were destroyed in the disaster, food right up front, diapers, formula, whatever those upfront emergency needs may be. So go ahead and complete that FEMA application, and there is a checkbox that says, do you have emergency needs? And that's what's going to trigger this serious needs assistance.
And if you kept receipts from when you did evacuate, if you have like a receipt for the gas, can you keep that receipt and once they've evaluated whether you have serious needs, then send that in later? Or have you missed the window for getting, for example, compensation for the gas you used to evacuate?
You can absolutely still apply in the first place now. You can also go back and appeal if they denied you, but you did have those emergency upfront costs.
Perfect. So even if you have already evacuated, if you have those receipts, you can keep them and still get that serious needs assistance. Fantastic. All right. And then one other do is make sure you're getting some help from your community. There's lots of conversation on social media and in the press right now about this, but we just want to highlight a few things you can do. We have a Helping Hands template that we will share in the email follow-up to this webinar, which can help you write down the things you actually need the most. There's a lot of people who want to help, but what exactly you need in terms of help may not be as obvious to them. So this can help direct them towards either getting you things from an Amazon wish list, helping you understand what sort of support you might need in helping you navigate things like insurance. If you want someone to sit there with you while you make the phone call, for example, it just helps you clarify some of your needs for your community. I also want to call out that if you do think you'll need a GoFundMe, you should make that sooner than later. Although you have time for lots of parts of the recovery process, the sad reality is that there's usually a peak in sympathy for survivors pretty soon after a disaster happens. And so, if that's something that you think you're going to need, it's helpful to do it sooner than later as the news cycle moves on. And then there are fewer people looking to help survivors, unfortunately. And then finally, there are still lots of community resources out there. There's a few spreadsheets that we'll include in our follow-up email as well, that have everything from clothing, furniture, cribs, other sort of in-kind donations. And going through and identifying those items is something you might be able to help have a trusted friend who doesn't even live in LA help you do. That's one idea for your Helping Hands template. But make sure you're getting that help from your community. Now, Justin, we know a lot of people don't have access to their homes yet or are just starting to get access to their homes. If they are able to go home, how can they do that safely? Can you walk us through just some of the things to keep in mind?
Yeah. First, check your site online at recovery.lacounty.gov. That should have some helpful photos initially without you actually having to expose yourself potentially to some hazardous situations. Please keep in mind that the next phase of the cleanup is the EPA phase, which is the pollutants type phase in terms of debris removal. So there will be airborne potential things to worry or consider when you are talking about actually visiting your property. PPE gear, which is protective gear, masks, gloves, things like that are highly recommended, especially right now in this phase, just in order to really try to prevent that type of airborne debris and dust from getting inside your lungs and things of that nature. If you have any issues, health issues, especially asthma or anything related to air or sensitivities, recommend that you do not go unless you absolutely have to. Even adjusters will understand that if they're trying to meet you out on site and do a walkthrough, there isn't, for total loss people, there isn't a whole lot to really achieve in terms of that site visit versus what can be done later on when there may be safer conditions. So if you do go, take photos, take video, document what you see. Those are always great steps in terms of making sure that you're capturing the moment. And if you have any belongings that you're trying to salvage, bring those with you at that point in time. Some people are nervous that if they move certain things, they may impact their claim. I mean, those are in rare situations, but typically you don't want to lose the item, even if the item's still in place there for a potential theft or some other issue that may come down the road. So recommended to take valuable items if you can. Now, when you do bring those items with you, obviously know that there may be some contamination with those items and separate those accordingly and just use common sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So if your home isn't a total loss, maybe it's just got some lesser degree of damage, in addition to taking photos and video like you've described, what obligations do you have if you have access to your property that to sort of make sure that you are not endangering your insurance claim?
Yeah, so I mean, one of the key questions that come up a lot is, well, I've been told that I need to preserve my property from further damage. And that concept is very common in policies to try to prevent further damage from happening from the original event. And we briefly mentioned tarping, potentially if rains were to come. It's the same concept where if you have something that can be abated, that can mitigate or at least slow down potential damages, so on and so forth, it is recommended. However, it is with common sense also. If you are not able to safely remediate, if you don't have the right situation, if you feel like they're, next door, they're going to be cleaning debris removal and you don't feel like it's appropriate, these are things to bring up with your adjuster in terms of really discussing next steps. Because there is a huge discussion right now about, well, if I get my house cleaned right now, what happens when maybe my neighbor does their debris removal cleanup and now I have an issue? There is no universal answer to that. It is going to be on a case by case basis and a carrier by carrier basis in terms of how they handle that. But it is a very important topic to at least bring up and mention with your adjuster at this point.
Absolutely. And I just want to reiterate for everyone, if there are police or other government officials saying that you cannot enter your neighborhood, you do not have to worry about putting a tarp on your roof or doing any other mitigation. Please don't break the law or endanger yourself to do it. It will not affect your insurance claim. They understand that if the police have blockaded the area, you're not allowed to go. So don't put yourself in danger to try and do that. That's only if you already have ready and easy access to your property. Okay, so that's the sort of immediate steps that folks are probably already in the process of taking. But let's take a step back and look at our long-term recovery, what to really expect as you rebuild. We should say that this spans many different categories. We're not going to talk about all of these in detail now, but just to be clear about the full scope of things that can fall into recovery and that folks like us at Broward Harbor are helping people with every day. That includes the insurance and government programs we're going to be talking about, but also things like mental and physical health, getting back the documents that may have been destroyed in the fire, all these other pieces of the puzzle. That's why we keep saying you have time. There's a lot of pieces to cover. We're going to focus on the most important ones and help set some expectations on those first. So let's turn back to Justin to talk through the broader scope of insurance, what the steps actually look like once you submit a claim. Because it's not just one phone call, right? There are many, many different steps. So Justin, just give us the high level. What should people expect?
Okay, from step one, you do need to notify your carrier of a loss. So that would be the initial step. Now, sometimes that could be through your agent. It could also be directly through the carrier and a claims number. But the notification of a loss is the first step in the process. And then addressing the immediate needs. And the immediate needs are typically housing, emergency funds, if your situation requires it, and potential mitigation. But again, that's not really high priority unless you really have a scenario where you can safely address potential mitigation inside a standing building. Total losses that would not apply to. But you would have the intake call. You would then talk with a representative from the carrier. Now, sometimes it will be a claims representative or an adjuster at times, but either way, they should be at least setting you on a path to at least address the initial concerns. Are you okay? Is everybody safe? How are we going to temporarily house you? Things of that nature in terms of insurance. Then typically it goes into really the discovery phase of the claim. The discovery phase is trying to quantify what you lost in terms of value and really how that applies to your actual policy. That would be the next step after the immediate needs. And then after that, adjuster visit is usually encompassing of quantifying your loss. They're going to be an integral part of trying to understand and settle upon potentially a value that works for everybody in terms of replacing your home and or repairing your home. With the adjuster, there may be also third-party vendors that are used, contractors, basically any experts that are needed in order to try to understand and substantiate the loss. And then with that comes usually a first offer. And that first offer, you're going to kind of know what the carrier's thinking about in terms of value, what they're sitting at in terms of maybe additional documentation that may be needed in order to prove additional value that was potentially lost. That's usually kind of the next step, which is a first offer. And then from there, it could go many, many different ways. At that point, we hope that there's a settlement involved and that it's understood on how to utilize your full policy benefits in order to rebuild and or repair your home.
And I know you've mentioned previously in this call the certified policy copy that you get. One piece that's helpful throughout this process, if you do get that certified copy of your policy, is there may be some benefits listed there that are not listed in the summary that you get in, say, your app or whatever else. You may discover you can get extra money for landscaping or any number of other things that are required in the state of California. So, as you're working with the adjuster and so on, you can make sure that you understand all of those deeper details on your policy so that you're getting sort of a maximal initial settlement offer. Though, of course, if you've already got one of those and you discover later you should have more coverage, you do have more options, which Justin's going to talk about just a moment. But before we move on, the main piece here is to remember insurance companies only pay for what you can prove that you have lost. So a whole lot of this is about proving the loss. And, it's just a critical component of the process to understand because it will help you be prepared to make that proof available so you get as much to rebuild as you can.
And just to reiterate one more time, because that's so important to all at that point, it is your duty to prove your loss to the carrier, not the other way around. And so the burden of proof will be on you. And that's why we're talking about, maybe experts needing to be involved, even potential public adjusters or attorneys if things are not resolvable in terms of, how you're attacking your claim. But yes, again, that is a critical component. It is really up to you in order to try to prove your loss. It's just something to really keep in mind here.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's say you get a settlement offer, and maybe it's the full value of the policy, but maybe it's not, and maybe actually you think it's insufficient. What are your options if you think that it doesn't look right? What should you do?
Yeah, so if there are some glaring things that you can observe that you're not happy with in terms of an offer or whatnot, obviously you could try to address it with the adjuster directly. If you're not getting anywhere with the adjuster, you can even potentially bring in a supervisor that may help resolve some of these potential issues. You can also hire an advocate, which could be a public adjuster or an attorney if you feel like you get stuck in a certain position where you really are talking specifically about your coverage and how it's being determined in terms of a payout. And so those are critical things that may get complicated in a lot of scenarios for people in terms of what buckets of coverage are applied to what values. And PAs are very good at that, and attorneys as well. Adjusters on the carrier side also are, they're more than capable of understanding where values should be put from at least their standpoint. But again, if you have a disagreement, you have options, and that's the key component here. The options is that you're not just stuck with whatever they say in terms of their initial offer. There are ways to, and carriers do kind of understand this for sure in terms of we don't really know what the true rebuilds costs are yet. It's too early in the game, so we're going to go based off of numbers that we feel are appropriate. And so I will say to the people that may have received a low offer or things of that nature that it really is kind of a starting point. It's usually not a full, this is all we're going to give you type of situation unless you have limits paid out. And that's pretty uncommon because a lot of people will have what's called extensions of coverage that are incurred, meaning you have to spend it to get it. And that's a whole nother kind of deep dive in insurance, but that's how it can lead to in terms of is my policy being paid out in full in terms of what I feel like the value is. And if not, who do I reach out to or how do I resolve those issues?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is going to be super unique for everybody. Your mortgage company might get involved, right? There's lots of moving pieces on this, but just know you don't necessarily have to accept that initial offer, as Justin said, and you don't need to hire an adjuster before you get it. So you can sort of wait to get that initial settlement, identify if you think it's going to be sufficient, and then you have all these different options we've provided here, including working potentially with a public adjuster to get it closer to what you're looking for. So, Justin, I know every timeline is different, but can you give us a sense of when people might first start seeing settlements? Is that going to be immediate? Will that take a few months? What does that look like, or is it totally unique each time?
For an average, if that's what you're asking, a guesstimation, in terms of the time frame that you're going to really find that you either understand their position fully in terms of their yes or no, or that you've come to a term that you can accept and move forward. You're talking 6 to 12 months, mostly 9 to 12 months before people really understand fully in terms of the benefits, what they're getting from, potentially FEMA or SBA, and actually performing a budget in order to really understand can they even rebuild at that point or not.
And does that
So
mean you
that
get,
it
oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, no, no. Go ahead. Go ahead.
What I was going to ask is, does that mean all you get is that sort of like temporary housing money in the meantime? Or is it possible insurance will give you something while that's all getting sorted out?
So loss of use is pretty straightforward in terms of it'll cover X amount of things or Y amount of things based on your situation. The general process of rebuilding and context is critical in terms of having those conversations with your adjuster. If you logistically can't start rebuilding due to X, Y, and Z, or permitting, or even trying to find a contractor that can actually rebuild your home, these are things that are legitimate that may push your timeframes out to what a normal fire would not really expect. You know, if we're talking a mass type of replacement scenario here instead of one individual house that needs to be rebuilt. So there is context here that should be taken into consideration when you're having these discussions about, it's taking forever for me to get my architect or engineer or, even to even have my surveys done on my land. We're hearing, and we'll touch on this a little bit about the public debris removal program, where we're hearing up to 18 months potentially. So that may truly impact a lot of people in terms of waiting that long for your site to even be cleared and ready to potentially work on. So yes, a lot of factors involved.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about government programs because I think there's a lot of confusion out there about the purpose that these programs have and how they can potentially help both insured and uninsured folks to navigate the recovery. Just before we jump in with Heather, want to make sure it's clear to everyone, FEMA does not duplicate insurance coverage. If you have something covered by insurance, FEMA's not going to cover it. And Heather, do you want to elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, I do want to debunk one really common question that I get. If you have insurance, that doesn't mean you automatically don't qualify for FEMA assistance. FEMA is intended to bridge the gap between your needs and what is covered by insurance.
Yeah, absolutely. And so if you have no insurance, obviously FEMA is hoping to be able to cover more of that. If you do have insurance, there can still be a gap. So there's lots of different ways that FEMA can provide support to people, both homeowners and renters. We won't talk about all of these, but Heather, do you want to highlight just a few here?
Sure, we already touched on that serious needs assistance. That's that right up front money for your evacuation costs. Temporary shelters going to be the next step. This is more of your emergency type housing. And then your continued rental assistance would be for some longer term, if your insurance doesn't cover or if you're uninsured for that loss of use.
Yeah.
And then there are several categories for everything from medical concerns to increased childcare. If a vehicle was destroyed or damaged and wasn't covered by insurance, all sorts of in between categories.
Absolutely. And so I know we already started getting into this a little bit, but housing support from FEMA does take several different programs. So serious needs being the first, temporary shelter, and then that continued rental assistance. Can you talk a little bit more about that last one, since obviously from the timelines we've heard from Justin here, folks are not going to be immediately getting back into their homes. They are going to need a longer term sort of housing support. What does that actually look like? How does that work?
So, as of right now, you can continue applying for rental assistance for up to 18 months from the initial date of the disaster. In this situation where there are so many steps and whole neighborhoods that are needing to be repaired and EPA concerns, I would expect that to be extended. So that's another of those wait and see. As of right now, you can apply for up to 18 months. You'll have to recertify every 3 months to show that you cannot move back into your pre-disaster home and that you have a financial need for that assistance. But you can, at this point, apply for up to 18 months.
And that's for people whose loss of use don't have loss of use coverage from their insurance, right? So if you can pay for housing some other way, FEMA's not going to cover it. But if you don't have that type of coverage, then you can apply for that continued rental assurance.
Yes, that's correct. We've seen a lot of insurance policies that will help for up to 12 months. So that additional 6 months, you could go and apply to FEMA if you're still not able to move back into your pre-disaster home.
Yeah, absolutely. So, one thing that's helpful for people to understand is that there's sort of maximum amounts of money that you can pull from FEMA for a few different things across all those different programs. So, there's two big buckets that we'll talk about: housing assistance and other needs assistance. Why don't you tell us about housing assistance first, since we just saw sort of how it works? Now, let's talk about the monetary cap on that and how it gets applied.
Yeah, so your housing assistance is anything having to do with the structure itself and your living needs. So that does include your rental assistance, your home repair. FEMA does offer additional assistance if you have accessibility needs, even if those things weren't in place before the disaster. That's for things like handrails, wheelchair ramps. They will also help address private owned roads, bridges, if you're in an HOA and that cost falls on you as a homeowner. You can apply for assistance with that. And then hazard mitigation, which would be preventing future damage from a similar disaster. And the maximum for all of those things combined in this case is $43,600.
And so we know if you need to cover a rental in LA County for 18 months, that's a pretty low number. We want to make sure everybody understands what that number looks like so they can make really good decisions about what their temporary housing should look like, because there's only so much in that bucket available for rental assistance.
FEMA's assistance is based on national averages for rental cost, repair cost, personal property. So that especially in these higher income areas with higher home values, it's not going to be comparable to what you'll actually need to continue living in that area, unfortunately.
Now, there's one other bucket. The other needs assistant bucket also has a maximum of 43,600, but that covers some other things. Can you walk us through that, please?
Sure. So this would be childcare is one that's I've seen pretty common in this area. If you have an increased cost because the place they were previously going is no longer available and you're having to travel farther, spend more in gas, the tuition is higher, you can apply for that assistance. Cleaning and sanitizing is not considered part of home repair. That will likely be very prudent in this situation as well with smoke damage and soot. Transportation would be, as we discussed, for a vehicle that was damaged or destroyed and not covered by insurance. Important to note, in general, FEMA will only assist with one vehicle per household, and they are not intending to restore it to pre-disaster condition or buy you a brand new similar vehicle. It is just to get your vehicle running, functional, safe. The big piece here is going to be the personal property. And that would be your furniture, your clothing, shoes, what FEMA would consider essential everyday items.
This is an important note across both housing needs and other needs assistance. Something that was surprising to me that Heather shared with me is this means that FEMA might cover something like repairing your kitchen, but not your second bedroom if that's like a guest bedroom, for example, because that's not considered required for livability. And that might also apply to some of your personal property as well. They're really focused on making sure that you are able to survive. Is that right, Heather?
Yes, and I'm glad you mentioned that. I've had a few people tell me that they've had a virtual walkthrough with a FEMA inspector after applying. This is especially the case in a total loss situation where there isn't really anything to go and visit. The FEMA inspector will call you on the phone and walk through room by room and go through the furniture that you had in that room. And one of the things they're doing there is looking at which rooms are essential everyday living spaces. So your master bedroom that you live in, your children's bedrooms that are lived in, you can apply for assistance for those spaces, but a guest bedroom, a storage space, a rec room, those are probably not going to be eligible spaces for assistance.
Very important to know. So there's a lot of different ways to apply for FEMA. Heather, do you want to just quickly run through them? We'll obviously be sharing this recording and slides, so you don't need to take a screenshot or anything. Any reason someone might especially want to use one of these options?
The in-person DRCs are really helpful if you just want a little bit more help through the process or if you have specific questions. Especially helpful for older folks who may not have access to electronic records or a scanner. I have also been told that both of these centers have additional experts there to help with other pieces. For example, your lost documentation. They have people there that can help you apply for a new birth certificate, social security card, all of those things as kind of a one-stop shop, as well as the tax reassessment forms that I believe we'll be discussing down the road. So, kind of a great place to just go and have someone to answer your questions, get a bunch knocked out all at once, and feel like you're getting a little extra help and not missing any important pieces.
Fabulous. And if you want
I
to,
do recommend checking that disaster recovery center locator before you go. They do not list individual phone numbers for each center, and their hours are subject to change. So, especially if you're driving a long distance, check that website first and make sure they're actually going to be open at that location.
yes, definitely. The hours that are listed here are only for the helpline, not for the DRCs. And then if you want to do a faster route, disasterassistance.gov or the FEMA app are more streamlined.
Yeah, the disasterassistance.gov application or the app, that'll take 10 to 15 minutes if you're tech savvy, maybe 15 to 20 if you're not so much. So that's pretty quick. And then the helpline's kind of a halfway in between. You'll have someone over the phone guide you through the questions, and they will actually submit the application with you.
And for all of this, even if you don't know the exact help that you're going to need, our recommendation is to start the process of applying immediately.
Absolutely. So I've had just about every single phone call I take, they say I was denied for FEMA. And I go, well, were you not approved or were you actually denied? Not approved in FEMA language means they're not making a decision right now. They are waiting for additional information. Most commonly, that will be that they are waiting for a decision from your insurance carrier. FEMA does a thorough duplication of benefits check. They will not offer assistance for anything that you are receiving money from another source for. So we recommend applying now, but understand that your application may sit at a pending or not approved status until everything is settled out with the insurance carrier. And then you'll go back, provide that documentation, say, here's what I got from insurance, here's what my costs actually are, and apply for that difference.
All right, now let's briefly chat about the other major government program, SBA loans. And this is sometimes surprising for people, but individuals are eligible for SBA loans, not just small businesses. Why is that, Heather?
So the SBA is actually the only direct lending agent of the federal government. So they are the only ones that are available to do it.
And talk us through some of the basics here. What can homeowners qualify for?
A homeowner can apply for up to $500,000 in home repair. That money can be used to renegotiate your mortgage. That can be used directly for home repair. That can be used to pay off anything you've put on a high interest credit card. So that is really helpful if you just need that chunk of money right up front to get started. If your insurance looks like it's going to take quite some time, it can be really helpful. Up to another 100,000 for personal property. This is your furniture, your clothing, not the structure of the home itself, but whatever was inside of it. Also available for renters. You can also apply for an additional 20% for mitigation, anything that would prevent future damage to the home, such as higher quality fireproof materials. The interest rates for an SBA loan are typically going to be much lower than what you would get on a bank loan. It varies depending on your ability to obtain credit elsewhere, which is something that will be determined by SBA. Again, big benefit is just that chunk of money right up front. There's no interest accrual for 12 months, and payments are deferred for 12 months.
That's great. And just noting for everyone that the application deadline right now for physical property is March 10th. So you still got a little bit of time there, but it's coming up. You can apply for one of these loans without actually accepting it. So just because you send in the application doesn't mean that they're going to send you the money immediately. You have to say that you want it once you are approved. And just remember, you do have to be able to get a loan in order to receive one of these. You can have much lower credit worthiness than for other types of loans potentially, but you do have to be able to qualify for a loan to receive one. And where should they be applying? Is there anything to keep in mind on that front?
The website application, again, pretty straightforward, about 20 minutes in general, if you have all of your financial documentation handy and ready to go. They will be looking at your income, your debt to determine your ability to repay. So be prepared to have those documents handy when you fill out the application. And again, you can go to any of those FEMA disaster recovery centers. There will be someone there that can walk it through in more detail with you, or you can call their helpline, and their customer service is pretty top notch.
Fabulous. Okay. Quickly want to let everyone know there are some state and community grants that are starting to come online. We won't go through each of these individually, but we'll include these links in the follow-up materials to this webinar, and more are appearing all the time. We're just at the beginning of the recovery effort, as we've mentioned. So it's best to think about different affinity groups you might be part of. That could be whether you have children, the what you do for work. There's lots of different types of relief funds that are out there. This is just a few of those that we've already verified may be available to you, but it's worth keeping an eye on those because more and more are becoming available.
Sorry. At the moment, we don't have a lot there, but keep an eye and especially appeal to any of your special interests or groups that you may be part of. There will be funding opportunities popping up for musicians or chefs or single mothers, or so whatever group you may appeal to, keep an eye out for opportunities there.
Absolutely. So there are a few other financial pieces of the puzzle. There's some ways that you can reduce your spending related to your home, and then a couple other tips and tricks. So Heather, do you want to speak to some of those?
Sure. The first would be discussing your deferment or forbearance options with your lender. There may be a state mandate coming. Uh, at this point, we don't have one, so it will be very dependent on who your lender is. Ask them what your options are. The big thing to pay attention to is a forbearance. Let's say you have a 3-month forbearance. That means that fourth month you will owe 4 payments all at once. This can be helpful if you need that money right now up front, but you know you have a payment coming soon. Just keep that in mind that you may be signing up for a large payment down the road. A deferral, however, they would take that period and put it onto the end of the term. So you won't owe one giant payment. It will just take you from maybe a 30-year loan to a 31-year loan.
Keep in mind, just
Again,
one thing is that your credit may be impacted, and that's a good question to also ask.
Yeah, absolutely.
a forbearance may affect your credit.
And then let's talk about property tax. What options do you have on that front? You're obviously not going to be using the property, and its value has probably significantly been impacted by the fires.
Right now, you will want to get that property tax reassessment request filled out. That will, first of all, significantly reduce your property taxes for right now. That will also set you up down the road when you are claiming this loss on your 2025 taxes. They will be looking at your pre-disaster property tax value and your post-disaster property tax value, and that difference is what you will be claiming on your taxes as your actual financial loss.
Absolutely. And then just a couple of other points here that we'll breeze through so we can get to the rebuild and mitigation portion of the program. But one pro tip from all of us, make yourself either a special bank account or a credit card for any expenses that you are hoping to be repaid by FEMA or insurance. You do not want to be going through your full statement trying to figure out what you want to get reimbursed and what you don't. So consolidate those all in one place and save yourself some time later. And remember, for all of this, it's worth talking to a financial specialist or an accountant to talk about your taxes. Heather just mentioned one type of tax impact, but there are many different ways that the disaster could potentially impact your taxes, including your 2024 taxes. So be sure to chat with them about that. And as we mentioned, there are going to be more grants and nonprofit assistance coming, so keep an eye out on that front as well. All right. We get a lot of questions about mitigation, repairs, and rebuild. So we want to make sure we have a bunch of time to cover that as well. I'm going to start with the number one question we have coming in right now, which is all about debris removal. So Justin, can you walk us through? I know there's a couple different phases of debris removal. Where are we now? What does that look like? And how is that going to change over time?
Yeah, there's a public option, which is pretty common, that follows disaster recovery, and that is through the Army Corps of Engineers. They're help working with the government in terms of clearing lots in a manner that will work with kind of the community and the goals of the community in terms of rebuild. There's two phases within the debris removal process. One is going to be guided by the EPA, and that is the initial step. The initial step is for them to make sure that the lot is clear of any type of hazards from toxicity to any type of materials left on site, things of that nature. They want to make sure it's safe. So that's first and foremost. That's phase one. They're saying that it takes up to 3+ months for that phase to be completed. And then there is phase two, and phase two is really the actual debris removal portion of your lot that is not related specifically to the EPA cleanup and their piece. So this is where the main debris removal happens. They're going to scrape your lot. Typically, it's up to 6 inches. That's usually what we found in the past, where they will basically go below 6 inches of your lot and scrape basically anything that is above that 6 inch line. And so that is phase two in terms of how the public kind of sets up your lot for potential repairs. In that step, there is something that I always like to mention, which is there may be caissons and pilings left in the ground from the actual public program in terms of debris removal. They may not be able to dig out your foundation. It's just not really in the scope that they're prepared to do so. What's important about that I want to flag to people is that there may be, out of the bucket of debris removal coverage, when you opt into that public program, you may be able to utilize some of those benefits before the payment is actually given to the government in terms of the public program. So let's say you had 20 grand potentially left of debris removal, you might be able to claim those costs on your insurance debris removal amount that you have allocated for debris removal, even when the public program is going to basically assume the full limits of what you have available in terms of your coverage. So there is one little piece in there that I just wanted to flag in terms of public. Now, there is an option for private. So phase two is also your potential to hire your own private debris removal company and work with them on your scope, what you want to have done and things of that nature without working within the public program. So you're going to have more control, you're going to have better time frames. And these are some of the benefits of working with a private debris removal company. You can also talk about scope and really what you're excavating, what you're not excavating. So you have a little more control over that. The public is a little more, here's our defined scope, and this is kind of what we're going to follow. So there's pros and cons to both. The best part about the public option is that you really won't be taking any money out of your pocket in order for that scraping to happen, especially if you don't have insurance at all. If you don't have insurance at all, there really will be no cost in terms of what their scraping is below grade about 6 inches in terms of prepping the lot. The Army Corps of Engineers is involved, like the slide is saying. The sign up is actually today, starts today. Um, how we're being told that this program is going to work is not by, they're not just going to basically serve first come, first served. It's going to be mapped out and planned through in terms of sections. And the more people that you get on the program in a certain area, typically they're going to attack that more so than the spread out areas. And they're going to have obviously a plan in place for that. So what else? Yeah, we talked a little bit about private debris removal. Just obviously be aware of what you're signing, what you're actually agreeing to if you're really considering a private debris removal source. I would also highly recommend, if you're going to go that route, to make sure that they're on the same page in terms of what needs to be done to your lot. There may be some savings and costs in terms of really doing it right the first time and prepping that so that the builder can actually start going the way that they want.
The other recommendation we might have is if you're able to try and stay in touch with your neighbors for both the public option that Justin mentioned as well as this private option. It sounds like the more people choose the same option, the easier it is to coordinate. For the private debris removal, there may be some cost savings associated if the entire block, for example, does it. The one thing to flag here is if you have accelerated debris removal on your lot and then other folks in the same area choose to go with the public option and that happens later, they may be kicking up new debris. And so the more you can coordinate, the easier it is to sort of mitigate some of the potential impact you could have from your neighbors if you're not on the same timeline. Anything you would add on that topic, Justin?
Especially for people that have existing structures that are not total losses, again, that element of cleaning and trying to make it a livable situation, with the outside debris, coming around, that may impact how you attack that concept.
Yep, absolutely. And then in terms of the rest of repairs and mitigation, we did talk about some of these emergency pieces, but if it's not a total loss and you do have access to your property because of that obligation you have to avoid future losses, and because there's rain coming, do consider finding out if you need to do something like tarp your roof or do any board up. Any other super high level pieces here that we should cover, Justin, around the types of contractors that you might want to hire at this sort of earlier stage?
Yeah, having a professional specific to what your needs are is critical. So whether that be a full reconstruction rebuild from ground up, you're probably looking for a contractor that specializes in ground up, brand new construction. If you have smoke damage inside, you're looking for a contractor that excels at smoke damage mitigation and abatement, and obviously referrals and following up in terms of trying to qualify or vet the contractors is usually critical. But you really do want to know, and this is why I always go back to having more than one opinion on really anything in terms of value or scope. It's just good because people can look at things in a certain situation very differently. And it's just important to kind of make sure that you're crossing your T's, dotting your I's in terms of understanding what am I really entitled to and what is the right method here in terms of, repairing.
Fantastic. And then let's chat about this incredibly important question. Making the decision, should you rebuild in your original site? Should you rebuild somewhere else? Or should you buy a new home? And while you're talking about that, if you can also touch on how it might affect insurance. It's a question on everyone's mind.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a really common one. So most policies have incurred cost coverages, meaning you have to spend it to get it. You also have potentially an opportunity to recover that may be withheld on your file as well. And it really comes down to what is your financial situation? What is your mortgage note? What is the land value? And what is your actual insurance payout? And see if it is advisable for you to rebuild or not, just based on your situation, your economics of your recovery process. And a lot of that won't be known until you really understand what is the rebuild cost. Even guesstimations are a good start, but you can't really answer that question unless, is my insurance adequate? And if not, can I bridge that gap somehow in terms of a loan or other structure in order to rebuild? For some people, rebuilding may not be the best option, but for the majority, I'd say 90% plus, it probably usually is because you're not utilizing certain coverages that are available to you with not rebuilding. That's lost equity, basically, in terms of what your policy could provide from a financial aspect. So it is an equation, really. At Bright Harbor, we do take that serious in terms of talking about what's your best scenario in terms of what's good for you and your family in terms of rebuilding. It really is just unique to your situation and what your goals are. Some people just don't want to live there anymore. Some people want to maybe build back an investment property of some kind and sell it. So there's a lot of options in terms of trying to recover value here that we do help with in terms of trying to weigh your pros and cons.
Yeah. And just a question I'm getting here that I want to make sure we clarify. How much is this dependent on the lot you were on before from an insurance perspective? Like if I decide, you know what, I want to move down to Manhattan Beach where there's not wildfire risk, for example.
Yeah, so in terms of the recoverable depreciation, I was talking about in extensions of coverage where basically you have to build it and incur it in order for it to be utilized. You can build on a different lot. You can also buy a built structure that's already built. And the math behind that is a little interesting. I can't really get into it a whole bunch right now, but basically land value is not really part of the equation. The policy insures construction cost. And so that's why they're open to the concept of, well, if you don't build on your land, you still have value here. We don't really care where you put it. Even if you have a previous or an existing structure that you want to buy in, the math works out in terms of what your policy provides. There is room for negotiation on that. So you're not stuck with your land in order to rebuild. Your mortgage company may have a different opinion on that, right? So keep that in mind in terms of, if you have a note on your mortgage, they may, that's going to be a whole different conversation between you and them in terms of, could you even pay off a loan to get them out of the way in order to utilize your land in a different way?
Fantastic. Okay, and we want to end just by making sure that everyone is aware. Unfortunately, disasters bring out the best and the worst of humanity. There are people who come out of the woodwork, both intentionally and unintentionally, can end up taking advantage of you. There are scams. So, would love to just quickly speak to some of the things that you should look out for. Heather, do you want to speak to this a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. This is already becoming an issue with some of the debris cleanup and the remediation. If anyone is going door to door, that is a red flag. If you did not request that they be there, they probably shouldn't be there. Anyone who's pushing you, make a decision right now. You need to sign this contract immediately. This is urgent. These are finite resources. If you don't do it right this minute, that person does not have your best interests in mind. And that's across the board. Any decision you're being asked to make, any contract you're being asked to sign, whether it's a contractor, an attorney, don't trust somebody who's pushing you to hurry up and make a decision right this second.
Yeah. Actually, I have a question here about class action lawsuits. It sounds like there's lots of sort of murmuring about potentially starting to join those, but people talking about timelines on that. Does this advice apply in that context?
It does. Our general guidance, again, we are not lawyers, we're not giving you legal advice, but our general guidance is wait and see. There will be so many class action and mass action lawsuits that will be coming out. Give yourself time to research and see what all of your options are before you jump on board with someone and sign a contract. And in general, a law firm that only gets paid if you get paid is probably going to be the right way to go. If they want you to sign a contract tomorrow and hand them a big retainer right up front, they're maybe not on your team.
All right, we are a little bit over the originally scheduled hour, but we can hang out for a few minutes here if there are questions. I am watching the Q&A. You can go ahead and drop those in. And otherwise, thank you all so much for taking the time with us. We appreciate the ability to support you on your recovery journey. If you are interested in learning more about Bright Harbor, you can go to brightharbor.com to learn more about the type of specialized support that we offer. If you really want to have experts like Justin and Heather, just a text message away, we're here to help. But otherwise, we'll be sending out lots of resources after this webinar. And like I said, we'll hang out for a few minutes just to make sure there aren't any lingering questions. But thank you so much.
Justin, I have a question for you.
Chris.
If my insurance carrier is sending my money straight to my mortgage lender, what does that mean for me? Does that mean it's going direct toward the mortgage? Does that mean my lender is going to give me that money to use it as they see fit? How does that work?
So valid question for sure. Any payment should have your name on it to begin with. So it should not be sent directly to the mortgage company. They will be typically a name payee on building related payments specifically. And what happens typically in that process is the funds will be appropriated to an escrow account. And this escrow account, the money will sit until basically you fill out some forms. And the forms basically ask, what's your intent with the money? Are you hiring a contractor? Are they legitimate? And then typically they will be involved in the rebuild process from day one. They'll initially release usually a third or some sort of amount upfront without really any other type of documentation. But what they're going to be involved in is the remaining amounts in the bank to make sure that the money's being appropriately addressed to really what they own, which is part of the land and property or the building itself in terms of structure. So they are a named payee because they are part ownership and they just want to make sure that the money is going back into the property. There have been a lot of situations where people don't want to deal with the mortgage company on their loss. And, the simple way is to pay off the note if you can, whether that be through an SBA. Some people are using their personal property money in order to potentially try to pay off that loan so that they are free to use the insurance proceeds as they feel is appropriate. But if the mortgage is going to be on there, they're going to really have a say in it. And again, I think I mentioned this before, but they're going to be basically involved in the entire rebuild process and or repair process. And there will either be milestones that they are will release money on or have some sort of system to where they release money based on, either you incur more cost or you hit certain milestones. So it really depends on the bank, but the money does go to them. They do have a say in it in terms of where the money goes. You want to pay off the loan balance with that money, then that is potentially an option for a lot of people. I will say be cautious with making those moves. Make sure that you're financially able to rebuild if you want, or at least understand how to requalify for a mortgage potentially or new construction loan should you want to pay off that mortgage. It's hard sometimes to requalify for a mortgage, especially when there's no asset on the land anymore. It's harder to really get. So those are things we tell our clients to keep in mind in terms of what is their best situation, how do they utilize that money, would they bring in personal property or SBA loans in order to maybe satisfy that loan? It's just based on a case by case basis, but typically you don't really have full control over that money.
All right, and we have one more question that I want to make sure we cover before we hop off here. Can you get FEMA housing assistance if you have a GoFundMe?
That is a great question and one that I've gotten several times. Um, Short answer, yes. Long answer, as I stated, FEMA does a very thorough duplication of benefits check. They will not offer you assistance for anything that you are getting money for from another source. So my recommendation is on your GoFundMe, either ask for help with something that you know will not be covered by FEMA or that you won't be asking FEMA for assistance with, or keep it really vague. If your GoFundMe says, please help pay for my apartment for the next 6 months, and then you go to FEMA and apply for rental assistance, FEMA's going to go, no, 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 you already got money for that. So either ask for something else with the GoFundMe or keep it vague.
Well, that's all the time we have today, but thank you so much to everyone who joined us. We really appreciate it.